So Christopher Nolan has released a new movie, keeping with tradition, legions of movie nerds and even casual filmgoers are awash with anticipation. In an era of film drowning in MCU and MCU-like movies gasping for originality and quality filmmaking, a real movie from a real director about a real story with a real budget has come out and it's called Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer might be one of the most important movies to be released in the last 20 years. Its box office performance could dictate the future of cinema. Will studios start rewarding talented filmmakers with the budgets that they deserve, or stay on the current path of cranking out patches of corporate sludge after corporate sludge? I don't know. Oppenheimer is not exactly what one might call an accessible movie for large audiences, but perhaps an inaccessible movie might just be what the industry needs. If there is one thing The Flash demonstrated, is that mainstream audiences are nauseated with big-budget soulless productions. Oppenheimer's shifting timelines, character depth, and heavy subject matter might just be what the doctor ordered. But anyways, let's talk about Oppenheimer. I won't bore you with a plot summary because we don't do that here. What I will say is that Oppenheimer is a truly fitting name for the film. It's about Oppenheimer the person and not the Manhattan Project and the development of the atomic bomb. While it is a big aspect of the movie and takes up the whole second act, it is far from the sole focus. Cillian Murphy plays Oppenheimer, and as far as his portrayal goes, well, another Nolan movie comes to mind to best describe it.
The audience knows the truth. But if you could fool them, even for a second, then you could make them wonder.
The best thing about this performance is that it's hard to believe that it is a performance. Much like Kate Blanchett's portrayal of Lydia Tarr or any of Daniel Day-Lewis's acting, Cillian Murphy becomes his character entirely, and the thought that this is all just pretend is almost hard to believe at times. Were I the type of person that still cares about the Oscars, I might say that an Oscar nomination and even perhaps a win are all but guaranteed for Cillian Murphy. Everybody else is perfectly fine in their supporting roles. Florence Pugh, Robert Downey Jr., and especially Matt Damon are the standout performances from a massive cast of A-list cameos and small roles. It kinda feels like a Wes Anderson movie in that way. The cinematography is interesting. Unlike most other Nolan films, it's surprisingly intimate and up close. Instead of the wide, epic shots that characterize IMAX and Nolan, this time around everything is so much closer and claustrophobic. This close-quarters approach, combined with fast cuts and a relentless score that literally almost never stops playing, creates a brutal tension, a vicious, nervous energy that engulfs the story until the critical point of implosion. It's the first Nolan movie that reminded me of Uncut Gems, I will say that. Although the continuous use of loud music throughout the film really elevates the atmosphere and the tension, I do have to point out that Nolan movies just aren't the same without Hans Zimmer. He's been replaced by Ludwig Göransson, and it's not that his score is bad, it's just not as great as Hans Zimmer's. Both Tenet and Oppenheimer fall short when compared to the Interstellars, Inceptions, and Dark Knights of the world in terms of score. The Trinity Test, aka the scene where the first nuke explodes, has been the most anticipated movie scene of the year, in part because it reportedly contains no CGI. It's entirely done with practical effects somehow, which has predictably been the target of many memes about Nolan letting off a real nuke for this film. The scene itself is something that tens can't really begin to describe. It's the culmination of 2 hours of stress building. Its job is to transport the viewer into the movie as just another bystander waiting for the bomb to explode, and well, color me blown away, I guess. Similar to how I felt like I stepped on the moon when I watched First Man in theaters, I felt like I saw a real nuclear weapon go off when watching Oppenheimer. Perhaps the most exciting and surprising aspect is how it's the sound and not the visuals that make the scene. The visuals are breathtaking, of course, but what really hits home, what really impacts you, is the sound wave that hits both our characters and our eardrums in the theaters a few seconds after a dead silent detonation. Not all is perfect, however, because Nolan movies are always so ambitious and far-reaching that making a perfect movie becomes extremely hard for him, and Oppenheimer is no exception. The problem here comes in the form of plot structure. The story is told non-linearly, shocker I know, by continuously shifting between two separate timelines. I feel like this doesn't add much to the narrative, and that only makes it needlessly complex and hard to follow at times. Another structural issue comes from the final hour. After the bomb goes off around the 2-hour mark, the movie turns into a complex legal drama for about an hour full of exposition in the form of political hearings, monologues, and speeches. It feels oddly placed because by that time the bomb has already exploded, and with it the tension built so relentlessly in the first and second act. So by then the story feels like it should be mostly over. As much as I like this movie, I would love to see an edited version that is told linearly, with all the legal drama stuff heavily reduced, and instead more focused on the science aspect. I would say this is not a masterpiece, but still a pretty great movie. As far as its place in the Nolan filmography, it's probably somewhere in the middle. Not good enough to crack the top 4, but much better than the likes of Tenet and The Dark Knight Rises or even Memento. I've seen some criticism regarding the lack of emotion, but I feel like this is actually one of Nolan's most emotional movies. He explores a single character in a depth lower than the Mariana Trench with mercurial precision. An extraordinary person with deep flaws faced with impossible choices. It's certainly not the most showy movie in terms of emotion, but just because the emotion portrayed is subtle and subdued, it does not mean that the movie itself is emotionally distant.